She walked into every conversation about religion with absolute confidence. Islam, to her, was just another outdated belief system, oppressive, irrational, and incompatible with the modern world. She had read a few headlines, listened to a few critics, and made up her mind long ago. There was no room for reconsideration, no need to explore further. She was proud of her skepticism and wore it like armor. In her mind, she was defending truth, logic, and freedom from superstition. And then, one day, in a setting she never expected, a child asked her a question that shattered the walls she had built so carefully around her beliefs. It wasn't a scholar, a religious leader, or a viral video that challenged her views. It was a simple, sincere question from a young heart, innocent, uncalculated, and profoundly honest. The kind of question only a child could ask, free from the politics and pride that so often cloud adult conversations. The moment it was asked, something shifted. She felt it, not in her intellect, but in her soul. It wasn't an attack or a debate. It was a mirror. And in that mirror, she saw not the flaws of Islam, but the gaps in her own understanding. The question echoed in her mind for days. What if she had been wrong? What if everything she dismissed so easily was actually built on something deeper, something she had never taken the time to understand? Slowly, curiosity began to replace certainty. She started reading, not from the voices that confirmed her bias, but from the source. She opened the Quran not to refute it, but to hear what it truly said. To her surprise, it didn't sound like the harshness she had imagined. It spoke of mercy, justice, patience, and wisdom. It challenged her not just intellectually, but spiritually. It didn't demand blind obedience. It invited reflection. She remembered that child's face, the sincerity of the question, and how it wasn't meant to win an argument. It was meant to understand. And that was what she began to do. Understand. Not Islam as portrayed in media or misrepresented by extremists, but Islam as it was, unfiltered. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she didn't know. Her heart, once closed off with certainty, began to soften with humility. This is not just the story of one woman's change of mind. It's the story of a heart opening to something greater than itself. A reminder that sometimes the strongest convictions are built on shaky foundations, and all it takes is one honest question to shake them. This is the story of how one child, without intending to, became the reason a soul found its way to the truth. And perhaps through her journey, others might find the courage to question what they think they know and rediscover what truly matters. She was known among her friends as someone who never backed down from a debate. Religion, especially Islam, was a topic she often approached with sharp criticism and firm conclusions. Her certainty didn't come from deep study or personal encounters with Muslims. It came from years of absorbing negative portrayals in the media, harsh commentary from influencers, and the echo chambers of online forums. She believed Islam was a religion of restrictions, of backward traditions, and one that stood in contrast to logic and compassion. To her, there was nothing more to explore. She thought she had Islam figured out, and no one could convince her otherwise. Her worldview began to shift during a visit to a community center where she was volunteering. It was a multicultural setting, and she found herself surrounded by people of various backgrounds, including Muslim families. She didn't expect anything remarkable to happen until a young Muslim girl, no older than 8, sat next to her during a break. The child smiled warmly and asked, "Why do people think Muslims are bad when we just try to be kind and pray to God like others?" It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't aggressive. It was genuine confusion from a child who couldn't understand why others misunderstood her faith. The woman was taken aback. In that moment, she couldn't respond with sarcasm or facts. She was stunned into silence by the innocence and sincerity in the girl's eyes. It was a question she had never really asked herself, not with honesty. Why did she believe what she believed about Islam? That one moment planted a seed. It lingered in her thoughts and quietly disrupted the certainty she once held. She realized her beliefs were built not on truth, but on assumptions. For the first time, she considered that maybe she hadn't given Islam a fair chance. Maybe the faith she had dismissed for years had something to offer. She decided to explore. She started reading, watching interviews with reverts, and learning about the Prophet Muhammad's character and the Quran's teachings. Slowly, her heart began to open. It all began with a child's question. A question that didn't aim to convince, but to understand. And it became the turning point in a journey that would change her life. She began her search cautiously, almost skeptically, unsure of where it would lead. But that one question from the child had touched something deep within her. For years, she had seen Islam only through the lens of headlines, opinion pieces, and the voices of those who had never truly understood it. Now, she wanted to know for herself. She started not by watching debates or reading criticisms, but by simply listening to Muslims, their stories, their struggles, their reasons for faith. And what she heard surprised her. She met women who were confident, educated, and articulate, nothing like the stereotypes she had believed. They spoke of Islam not as a set of restrictions, but as a source of peace, clarity, and empowerment. She listened to men who found strength in prayer and humility in service to others. She saw how the faith guided their daily lives, not with fear, but with discipline, purpose, and compassion. Slowly, the pieces started to fall into place. The more she learned, the more she realized how far her earlier beliefs had been from reality. Then, she opened the Quran. She expected to find judgment and harshness. But instead, she found verses that spoke to the soul. Verses about justice, mercy, patience, charity, and the importance of reflection. She saw how Islam did not fear questions. In fact, it welcomed them. The Prophet Muhammad himself encouraged seeking knowledge and being kind to others, regardless of their faith. These were not the teachings of a harsh or irrational religion. They were the signs of something deeper, something true. She reflected on her own life, on the noise, the stress, the constant search for meaning. And then she looked at the calm and focus she saw in those living according to Islam. There was something different, something real. It wasn't about losing freedom, but about gaining direction. It wasn't about blind obedience, but about conscious submission to something greater than oneself. What had begun as a challenge to her beliefs had now become a journey to the truth. One child's innocent question had opened her heart to a world she had ignored for far too long, and now, step by step, she was walking toward it. With open eyes, a humble heart, and a thirst for what was real. As her understanding deepened, so did her internal struggle. The more she read, the more questions she had. Not about the truth of Islam, but about why she had spent so long resisting it. She realized that much of her resistance hadn't been based on logic or facts, but on fear. Fear of change, fear of judgment, fear of admitting she might have been wrong. But the teachings of Islam didn't mock her doubt. They acknowledged it. Islam didn't rush her toward belief. It guided her step by step with wisdom and patience. She started having conversations, not debates, with Muslims she had previously kept at a distance. These weren't arguments over theology, but genuine exchanges, rooted in respect. She was surprised by how open, kind, and willing they were to answer her questions without pressure or superiority. They shared their journeys, their moments of weakness, and how Islam brought strength into their lives. It made her feel safe enough to admit her own uncertainty. One evening, she listened to a convert share his story. He too had once mocked Islam, until a single verse from the Quran turned his heart. That verse said, "Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah, do hearts find rest." Those words stayed with her. They echoed in the silence of her heart when the world around her felt overwhelming. And she realized that's what she had been searching for all along. Rest. Not just rest from physical exhaustion, but rest from confusion, from emptiness, from the chase for purpose that never seemed to end. Islam didn't promise a life without hardship, but it offered meaning within that hardship. It didn't erase questions, but gave room to explore them with sincerity. As she spent more time learning, praying, in her own way, and reflecting, something profound began to happen. Her heart no longer fought the idea of Islam. Instead, it leaned into it, not with fear, but with hope. She began to see Islam not as the end of her freedom, but the beginning of true liberation. From doubts, from the noise of the world, and from the pressure to constantly define her own truth. In Islam, she found an anchor, and in that anchoring, she found peace. The child's question had started a journey, but it was her willingness to search for answers that changed everything. As she continued on her path of discovery, one of the most unexpected transformations was not in how she thought, but in how she felt. For years, her perception of Islam had been shaped by external narratives. Now, she was discovering its internal reality. It wasn't just the clarity of its message that moved her. It was the sincerity of the people who lived it. She saw Muslims praying in quiet corners at work, fasting through long days with patience, giving charity without announcing it, and smiling even in hardship. There was something deeply beautiful and consistent about the way their faith translated into action. She began to compare that quiet dignity with the spiritual emptiness she had long ignored in her own life. She had success, education, and freedom, but something was missing. It was a sense of purpose that neither career nor relationships could fill. She realized that she had been building a life without foundation, always adjusting, always searching, but never finding. Through Islam, she encountered a worldview that was both grounded and elevated, a way to live with purpose while preparing for eternity. The teachings of the Quran weren't abstract philosophies. They were deeply practical, urging believers to honor their parents, care for the poor, speak truthfully, and treat others with mercy. She was struck by how often the Quran emphasized balance between faith and reason, heart and mind, this world and the next. And what truly softened her heart was the repeated reminder that God is most merciful, most forgiving. This wasn't a religion built on fear, as she had once thought. It was a path of hope, healing, and connection to the divine. What surprised her most was how Islam didn't ask her to abandon her intellect. It invited her to engage it. Islam didn't suppress questioning. It encouraged it, as long as it came with sincerity. She began to see that faith and logic were not enemies in Islam. They walked hand in hand, and in that harmony she found herself letting go of the resistance she had once clung to so tightly. Each day brought new realizations, new peace, and new layers of understanding. The journey had begun with a question, but now it was leading her to answers she never knew she needed. She wasn't just learning about Islam, she was beginning to live it, to feel it, to see herself reflected in its wisdom. Her transformation wasn't sudden, it was gradual, like the dawn breaking through after a long night. And what moved her most wasn't a debate or a dramatic moment of revelation. It was consistency. The kindness of Muslims around her, their humility, their discipline, their sense of accountability before God. All of it left an impression that words never could. Islam wasn't just something they believed. It was something they lived. It shaped their choices, their relationships, and even how they responded to hardship. And she saw in them a kind of peace she had always longed for, but never truly understood. One night, after months of learning, reflecting, and struggling with her own doubts, she sat quietly with a copy of the Quran. She wasn't searching for a specific verse. She simply opened it, asking God for guidance. Her eyes landed on a verse that read, "And whoever submits his face to Allah, while being a doer of good, will have his reward with his Lord, and no fear will there be concerning them, nor will they grieve." Quran 2:11-2. That verse struck her deeply. It was an invitation, not a demand, a promise of peace, of reward, of freedom from fear and grief. In that moment, she realized that her entire journey, the questions, the hesitation, the breakthroughs, had led her here. It wasn't about changing who she was. It was about returning to who she was meant to be. And that didn't feel like losing anything. It felt like coming home. She thought back to that little girl who had first sparked this journey. A child's innocent question had opened her heart, and now she was ready to answer it, not with words, but with her life. She had spent so long looking for truth outside of herself, and yet it was within her reach the whole time. Through Islam, she found clarity, she found purpose, and more than anything, she found God. Not as an abstract idea, but as a constant presence, a source of love, mercy, and guidance. She took her Shahada with tears in her eyes, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the people who walked it with her, and for the one who never stopped guiding her heart, even when she wasn't looking. After embracing Islam, she realized the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Her heart had found peace, but now came the challenge of living with this new identity in a world that often misunderstood it. She faced questions from friends, distance from some family members, and even her own moments of self-doubt. But through it all, something had shifted inside her. The same strength and clarity that led her to Islam now anchored her through the storms that followed. Her faith wasn't a fragile thing, it was resilient, rooted in conviction and nourished by trust in God. She began to build a new community, connecting with other reverts who had walked a similar path. Their stories echoed hers, of struggle, discovery, and ultimately transformation. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, and that this path, while sometimes difficult, was filled with purpose and reward. She learned to pray consistently, found comfort in fasting, and felt the beauty of giving quietly for the sake of God. Each act of worship deepened her connection not just to her Creator, but to her true self. One of the most powerful changes she noticed was how Islam redefined success for her. It wasn't about how others saw her or what she achieved. It was about sincerity, patience, and striving to live in a way that pleased God. She no longer felt the need to chase every trend or prove herself by worldly standards. Her sense of worth came from within, from being a servant of the Most Merciful. That shift brought a quiet confidence she had never known before. What touched her most was how Islam honored her struggles. The Quran acknowledged pain, loss, confusion, and promised that no tear, no effort, no silent prayer would ever go unnoticed. This was not a cold or distant faith. It was intimate and compassionate. She felt seen, heard, and guided every step of the way. Looking back, she often thought of how one small moment, a child's question, had started a journey that transformed her soul. That moment, though simple, had been a divine invitation, and answering it changed everything. Today, she walks with faith in her heart and purpose in her steps, knowing that this path, though not always easy, is leading her exactly where she was always meant to go. The journey that began with skepticism, curiosity, and a single question from a child became a powerful story of transformation, hope, and rediscovery. What started as a confident rejection of Islam turned into a sincere exploration of its truth. A truth that spoke not just to the mind, but to the heart. Along the way, she learned that Islam isn't about blind belief or forced submission. It's a journey of the soul, guided by reason, illuminated by compassion, and rooted in the deepest longing of the human heart to know its creator. Through every challenge, every doubt, and every quiet night of reflection, she found answers that resonated with her soul. She discovered a faith that did not suppress questions but welcomed them, a community that, despite imperfections, reflected a beauty and sincerity that couldn't be denied, and a path that didn't demand perfection, only effort, humility, and the willingness to keep turning back to God. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most profound changes begin in the most unexpected ways. That a single question, asked in innocence, can unlock a door we didn't even know was closed. And that no matter how far we feel from the truth is never far from us. To everyone watching, thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. If this story touched your heart, inspired your thoughts, or opened your eyes, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories of hope, truth, and transformation to light. And remember, no matter where you are in your own journey, truth is always within reach. Keep searching, keep questioning, and keep your heart open. Because sometimes one moment is all it takes to change everything. Thank you for being with us. Peace be upon you all.